Hello and welcome to One Credit Chats, a podcast where I talk to people about shoot 'em ups. I'm your host, Looking for Pants, and joining me today is Rastan, or Rastan78. He is the Western world record holder for Darius Gaiden, as well as a collector and aficionado of shmup hardware. So keep a tight grip on your Saimitsus because a huge interview is approaching fast. It's a One Credit Chat! Hey, how's it going?
Hey, how are you?
Pretty good, thanks. So glad that we were able to finally do this. Excited to talk to you. I'm excited to talk to anybody about shmups, honestly. I don't know many people who play them, so that's cool.
Oh yeah, it's a little obscure.
First, what should I call you? Do you want to go by Rastan? Is there another nickname or name that you prefer?
Yeah, Rastan's cool.
Rastan.
I think that's probably how most people that already kind of know the game or whatever, or know me, would probably know me by, because I did the SGG weekly, like with Prickly Angler.
Yeah, that's right.
He's another good person to talk to if you want to find out more about like the Darius series in general. He was just messaging me and he said he's in Japan right now and he just met one of the really good Darius 2 players over there.
Oh, that's really cool. Yeah, I'll have to reach out to him.
Right. Yeah, he hasn't told me a lot of details. He said he's kind of like running around really busy, but he's going to kind of fill me on how the whole trip went or whatever. So,
oh man, that sounds so cool.
Because you don't always get the connection to the Japanese players, you know. It's not like the fighting game scene where the top players are famous, you know, and have big followings on Twitch and YouTube channels and they're like content creators. It's like the top shmup players are sort of anonymous over there, you know.
Yeah, and that disconnect between the East and West is something I'd like to talk more about a little bit later, too, because I think that's really an interesting element of the high score scene with STGs.
Right. Yeah, and there's sort of almost this archaeology to finding out how to get high scores. It's not that you just go on YouTube and there's already a tutorial video that explains how to get the scores. You know, it might be something where it's only a few players that really know some of the techniques. And then sometimes just depending on the culture over there, some people share and they upload videos. Like the guy who has the highest score in Darius Gaiden has this philosophy that he doesn't share his videos publicly, only with people that he knows personally or his friends.
Do you know why that is? Is it so that people don't steal his secrets to getting more points? Or?
Yeah, I'm not totally sure because I know that like there's a DVD that has his high scoring run on it and certain players have seen it, like Western players have seen it. I think it's just because his own personal philosophy about it, from what I know. I don't know that it's so much like he doesn't want anyone to beat his score. Mm-hmm. I think he maybe just feels like it's a personal thing to him, you know, that he figured out these techniques and it's like something he kind of like treasures, which I don't fully agree with, but I guess that's everybody's own personal, I would rather share.
Right.
And kind of like grow the number of people that can, because it's already so obscure, and so few people already know the tricks that it's like if you hide the tricks, then it's like nobody picks up and plays the game and even tries to score it at all, you know. So
I like the word that you used, archaeology, for looking into scores and it seems like that for so many of these games too, that even just being able to figure out who has the high score that's already a challenge by itself, let alone figuring out how to do it for yourself or to score higher for yourself.
Right. Yeah. And people have done a lot of work to make some of that information more accessible, and replays have gotten way more accessible than they used to be, where it used to be maybe tracking down a DVD or a VHS tape even from some obscure source in Japan or eBay or something. And then certain games had super play type replays available and some didn't. And there would just be huge discrepancies where you might wonder, how did they even get that score? How is that possible?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And there might not be an explanation for it. But now I feel like the gap has been closed quite a bit. Even just how much Google Translate has improved makes a big difference.
Sure.
That used to just be gibberish. And you might find some Japanese language site that explains certain strategies. And if you didn't speak Japanese, you were pretty much screwed. But now Google Translate does a good enough job that you can look at those things and and see basically what they're talking about.
Yeah, I found myself using
Google.
Google Translate a lot for figuring out stuff on the STG difficulty wiki for video stuff. It's made it a lot easier. Before we get too caught in the weeds here, I want to go back a little bit and talk about maybe your history with the genre a little bit. So how did you get started with shmups?
I played them a little bit off and on. I think I had like R-Type Delta on the PlayStation 1 or Raiden Project. But I didn't take them seriously. I was more into fighting games.
Oh, okay.
Competitively, like playing in arcades and stuff like that.
Was there a specific fighting game that you gravitated towards?
I mostly played Capcom vs. SNK 2 and Third Strike. And I played in the arcade because I just happened to live in Northern California near an arcade where the top competitive players in those games congregated. And I also got into collecting PCBs because it was at a time when they were really cheap and you could just pick up Battle Garaga PCB or like I had all the Rising games, arcade boards, but the way that I got into it, because I was a fighting game player, when I first started buying PCBs, I would get like Neo Geo fighting games or CPS2 fighting games, but there's not really a point to playing those at home because you don't have any competition.
Right, yeah.
It's not that fun to play the CPU. So I started buying shmups because I felt like you could compare scores with other players and you could kind of bring home a little bit of that competitive arcade vibe while playing the boards at home. Because online back used to be pretty bad for fighting games too, so the 1cc or the score kind of brought some of that tension that you got from playing fighting games without actually having other players right there with you.
Yeah.
So that was, what got me into the genre. So was kind of trying to chase that competitive feeling that you got from fighting games at home without having anyone else to play against, And it also kind of bridges the gap across countries, because then you couldn't play Japanese players, for example, but you could compare your high score to a Japanese player, even if you couldn't play online with them very easily. So
yeah, the competition is necessarily international. Only one person can have the highest number.
Right. And that meant like for most of my early time playing the genre, I was only playing on PCB, so I didn't use any save states or restarts or anything like that.
Oh man, see, I can't, I can't imagine honestly with that.
Right.
Yeah.
So there were a lot of games where I would get, like Battle Garaga, I would get to the final boss and die, and then.
So is that the game that you really would say that you got started with? Is Battle Garaga?
I think it was actually Backraid.
Oh, okay.
And there wasn't that much of a scene around like Rising games in the West. I just sort of picked it off of a list of PCBs that I thought looked cool. And then kind of started trying to figure out the chaining and stuff with that game and comparing notes with people on the forums and stuff that were trying to figure stuff like that out.
When you did get into it, was it immediately, okay, I want to score as high as possible? Like I want to try and get a high score in this. Like, did you start with going for a 1 credit clear or just playing it casually first?
I think I started trying to get scores right away.
Okay.
And maybe part of that was not having save states. So because you're constantly playing the first 3 stages over and over, you just start trying to perfect those stages. So it maybe wasn't the best way to approach it. It's probably smarter to focus on the clear first.
I don't know. It seems like it's worked out pretty good, pretty good for you.
Yeah. I would have like quote unquote like high scores where I would score the first few stages as best I could and then die in stage 4 and not even have a clear, but now playing with save states and everything, it's a little bit easier to practice all the later stages and all the bosses, and then you can throw together the clear much more quickly. And you're not getting bored of those first stages and finding yourself, having to do scoring techniques to kind of keep the first few stages interesting. So that's probably a smarter approach, do the clear first and then worry about the score later.
Let's go deeper with that a little bit. So now, if you're approaching a new game and you want to learn it so that you can score well, what's your process that you'd go through?
Well, one big difference now is my life is so much busier than when I was younger. Sure. So I would definitely use save state and just practice, make save states for the hard parts of the bosses and get it down to the point where I can just put together the full run because it's just so much more efficient to do it that way. My life was less busy. I could see doing more full runs and just kind of gradually building up the skill level. But I'll play on the Switch portable just because it's easier to fire it up for 15 minutes and like do some boss practice on one little section. And then because I don't even really have time to sit down and play longer RPGs, or if I were going to sit down and play like The Last of Us or something, it would probably take me 6 months to play through the whole game, you know, in 10-15 minute chunks. So in a weird way, even though shmups are like a hardcore genre, if you stick with one game over time, you can actually accomplish quite a bit without investing hours every night, just through sort of picking away at it and not giving up on a specific game over a longer period of time. You don't need a 4-hour window to sit down and just play. You know, you can kind of chisel away at it slowly. That was kind of one of the reasons I got into Darius Gaiden, is because it's a pretty accessible game and I wanted to get back into doing some scoring. It's a good balance of a game because it's not super hard to get into, but it does have a pretty good amount of depth to it if you want to go a little deeper with the game.
So did you start with Darius Gaiden on PCB or on Switch?
On Switch.
Okay.
I hadn't really played the series a lot in the past before. I think I might have I've messed around with the Saturn version here and there, but I got into it more when the collection came out on the Switch.
Yeah, those M2 ports are fantastic.
Right.
So you mentioned Darius Gaiden being accessible. So can you talk a little bit more about that? So what makes that game more accessible compared to others when it comes to scoring?
Well, one factor is the auto fire. The game where if you use auto fire, it doesn't necessarily make the game super easy for scoring, because usually with scoring, there's an incentive to milk bosses, leave things alive longer, do things that are more risky, boost the rank of the game really high. So there's still challenge in the scoring, but if all you want to do is clear the game and you turn on 30 hertz auto fire, it's pretty easy to clear the game. And also because the bombs in the game are really powerful.
Yeah.
And you get a good amount of them. You get extra lives, which are just hidden in the landscape. You don't have to hit a certain scoring threshold to get the extends. And you have 3 bombs per life. The bombs give you total invincibility, and you can also point blank during the bombs. You can basically kind of just cheese your way through the easier routes if you want to clear the game. And then from there, there's sort of a logical progression of, if you want to play for score, you go for a no miss. You get a big bonus from just clearing without dying. Then you go for no bomb. You get a big bonus for clearing with the bombs. And you can just sort of add in piece by piece as you improve the progression of how to score. And then eventually there are some really tricky things on most routes that are really kind of high level skills, but you don't necessarily need to do those things until your score is already really high.
I remember some of that from your SDG weekly interview, where you were talking about things like sprite limits and managing certain sections of the game to make sure that you can maximize your score that way too. Can you talk a little bit more about some of the more maybe esoteric scoring mechanics that are in the game that most people probably wouldn't pick up just playing it casually?
Yeah, I mean, one thing that's kind of interesting. So when the guide for the game came out in 1995 or whatever it is, it's kind of rare for shooting games, but there's a very detailed gamist book that really goes into strategies and scores. And they had a chart with the highest possible scoring routes in the game. And then the theoretical max score that you can get for each stage and then for each route. And they're pretty much accurate, but the routes that go through the Titanic Lance boss, which is the giant squid, it's the giant battleship stage, you know, with the giant squid that you fight throughout the stage. All of the routes that go through there, they underestimated the theoretical max score.
Oh, interesting.
And players... the top players were able to figure out how to take it even farther. And part of the reason was that it's kind of hard to explain to people who don't kind of already know the basics of the game. But generally in Darius Gaiden, the most powerful shot level is one shot level below the max. So you spend a lot of time in the game dodging the red power-up medals so that you never power up all the way.
Why do you think that design decision was made for the game?
That's a really good question. Yeah, I mean, these old games, they're kind of funky. Like, it's hard to look at the game and know exactly what they were thinking and know what was intentional and what was just like they balanced the game in 2 weeks. And the guys making the game were 22 years old, and some of them had never worked on a shmup before, you know?
That is wild to think about, especially because how polished that game still feels today. It's an incredible product.
Right. And certain esoteric scoring techniques, there's just absolutely no way they considered. And then certain things probably they did consider, but it's hard to tell which is which. You just kind of have to deal with it. So I'm not totally sure why they balanced it that way.
Is the difference between those two shots as pronounced if you're not using auto fire or 30 hertz auto fire?
It depends, but it can be even more pronounced.
Oh, really?
Like,
okay.
like the King Fossil boss, if you're not using auto fire and you miss a power up and you don't have the white balls, it takes forever to kill the boss without auto fire. Like, you almost want to reset. Like, you're just like, oh crap, I don't have white shot. Like, why don't I just start over, you know, because it takes quite a while. And, you know, the captures, if you don't have white shot, that was the thing that they figured out that enabled even higher scores. There's a few players that can play at max rank, max shot, and still get the captures, which enabled on Titanic Lance more milking. But back in the day, they probably had no idea that that technique was possible. They were just kind of sticking with the meta of never go up to max shot. So they weren't able to discover the full potential of milking the boss, because you can actually milk faster with the max shot.
This is something that I talk about a little bit in the video that I'm working on now. So I took a clip from Moken's run of his high scoring run. Could you explain a little bit more about the milking strategy and how milking works for bosses in the game?
It depends on the boss a lot. For the main bosses, there's a 4-minute timer.
Okay.
And it usually has to do with some type of destructible shot, aside from the boss parts that you can destroy. Some people call destroying boss parts milking. I usually, when I'm talking about milking, like the way I define it is it's some repeatable thing that you can just continuously do over and over as long as the boss is still alive. Like a destructible shot that just keeps on spawning.
So what's an example of that from one of the bosses in the game?
Many of the bosses, like even the first boss has it with the scales that come out.
Sure. Okay. Yeah.
You can do that for 4 minutes and just continuously destroy the scales until the boss times out.
If you time out a boss instead of destroying it, do you get the same number of points as if you had destroyed it with your own shot?
No, I don't think so. So you want to destroy the boss right at the last possible moment if you're trying to milk all the way. And then the other purpose for milking is if you're playing with auto fire, you can use, you know, one of the biggest influences on the rank going up is time, just the passage of time. So if you're milking 4 minutes on every boss, you're basically doubling the length of the entire game. So the rank counter just has that much more time to increase.
To someone listening who might not understand rank or be familiar with how that works, can you explain that a little bit?
Yeah, so the rank is an adaptive difficulty setting. That means the game is getting harder as you do certain actions in the game. Darius Gaiden has one of the first rank systems that's very similar to Battle Garaga, which came out after Darius Gaiden.
Oh, interesting.
In that almost everything you do increases the rank, you know, collecting medals, shooting, destroying boss parts, you know, the list goes on, but it's essentially almost every action increases the rank in some way. And the only thing that reduces the rank is dying. Different things are tied to the increase in rank, and some of those things just simply make the game more challenging, but some of them can also increase your score, like the spawn rate of destructible shots coming from bosses, or the typical rows of enemies that you see spawning out. just the smaller Zako enemies, you get more enemies coming out per wave at higher ranks than you do at lower ranks. So without auto fire, rank management is more about not going too high, because you'll make it very difficult to do the captures and some of the scoring tricks if the game gets too hard. But with auto fire, it can become more about boosting the rank as much as you possibly can, because even at high rank, you can just blitz your way through the game. So you can take advantage to some of those scoring opportunities that come along with high rank. So dragging out the boss fights as long as you can. Sometimes there's barely any points to be gained from milking that boss, but you'll still see high level players milk that boss for 4 minutes more for the rank increase, so that will then pay off on a later boss. They'll benefit from the higher rank.
How long or what's the point in the game usually where you'd hit max rank?
On an auto fire run for high scoring, you might hit it by like the 5th or 6th stage.
Oh, okay.
If you're really rank boosting. You'll definitely hit it by the end of the game. If you're doing a high score run with auto fire, you'll hit max.
Oh, so
which is sort of
it's a high threshold. Then I didn't realize that it took so long to max it out.
Yeah, on the Titanic Lance runs with the really high rank boosting, they'll max it out during the Titanic Lance stage, and then I think there's still 2 more stages left in the game after that.
Okay.
But that's pretty extreme. Most people are not going to do the level of milking that would result in it maxing out that fast. But by the next stage or by the final stage, a normal high scoring run, you'll be maxing it out.
Do you remember the point where you're playing Darius Gaiden on the Switch? You're learning about these scoring mechanics. There's the Gamist article, maybe some replays that you've seen online. Was there a point where you realized, oh, hey, I think that I could actually get like a competitive high score?
Yeah, I didn't think that I would at first. I think part of that happened because I happened to choose a route that was pretty accessible for scoring. I didn't want to choose the main route that most people play, which is the V route, which is known to be very accessible for getting high scores. And I thought, well, that's sort of like playing Ken in Street Fighter, let's pick something a little. And I set the goal of getting the Western record, but I wanted to do it with the route that people didn't really play. And the route that I picked, I thought, well, I'm going by the path less traveled. This is going to be a bigger challenge. And the theoretical max score is even lower than the route that everybody else plays. But it turns out that route, even though it's underplayed, it's pretty accessible. It's not that hard to get a high score that's closer to the world record on this route. Whereas if I had chosen
just for clarity, which route are you talking about?
That was the Z route, which is the jellyfish. There's some tricky sections to getting a high score, but compared to like Zone Y, Odious Trident, any of the zones that have the Titanic Lance milking or the Great Thing route, if you were to try to chase, a 98% or 95+% world record score on those routes, it's a huge jump in difficulty from something like the Z route, like just a huge jump.
Just because of the skill ceiling and learning Titanic Lance?
Yeah, that's probably one of the main reasons. Okay. And the rank boosting that you have to do to get to Titanic Lance. The key section where you can get a huge score increase on that boss, it's not the 4-minute long boss timer type thing. It's just this one section that lasts 1 minute. So you want the spawn rate of these destructible turrets that you're destroying to be super, super high. You have to get there with really high rank to get the insanely high scores, which means rank boosting and milking every single boss up to that point. And then if you make one mistake on that boss, you would have to start all over.
Right.
So the run, the overall run, it's like 40, whereas a normal run in the game is 20 minutes long. You cut out
just a second there. Do you say the Titanic Lance runs are 40 minutes long?
Yeah, if you do all the milking and everything.
Wow.
Probably by the time you get to the key section that's really difficult to do the milk, you've already been playing for like 20 minutes.
Oh my goodness.
And some of the rank boosting is really hard. The players that get the high scores, they milk the neon light illusion boss for 4 minutes.
Mm-hmm.
And it's a boss that has these really difficult kind of like cave bullet hell patterns. And so if you want to get the rank high, you have to dodge one of the hardest patterns in the game for like 4 minutes straight. Yeah, it's just way more difficult than some of the other routes. I think I kind of thought after getting a high score on Z route, what was like 98% of the world record or something like that, like, oh, I'll just pick up the Y route and then do the same thing, not realizing that the skill threshold is really, really high for scoring compared to the Z route.
And getting that 98% score, and also that was the Occidental record, right?
Mm-hmm.
How long did that take you? I guess from when you first picked up Gaiden to when you got the score, how long do you think it was?
That's a good question because it was a while ago, so I can't remember exactly how long it took.
Okay.
But it was probably over the course of months, like several months, but not playing constantly or anything like that. It didn't take super long. I think part of the barrier was more not knowing certain things about the game.
Yeah.
There were some other players that helped me out with figuring things out that I didn't fully understand, like a player named Matthew and Prickly Angler.
Mm-hmm.
And I found some things on Japanese sites and things like that. In a lot of ways, the knowledge check parts were some of the harder things to overcome because some of the kind of obscure stuff, there's no way to really know some of this stuff and just figure it out on your own, you know, without a little help or conferring with other players. Matthew shared a lot of good information that I didn't know. I think he pretty much hacked the game and looked at source code on a lot of stuff.
Oh, that's interesting. See, that's something that I wish we had the data for more games, because I feel like there's a lot that could benefit from a deeper look into what's going on under the hood.
Right. And you see the speedrunning community, which I don't follow too closely, but it seems like there's so much of that going on, really deep diving on how things actually work and figuring out how to exploit things and understanding on a deeper level.
It's interesting that you mentioned that because that's something that I bring up in the video I'm working on about Gaiden as well, is that difference between how high scores were this incredibly popular thing once, like they were a fundamental part of video games in arcades. And now it's almost non-existent. Like, of course, there are games with high scoreboards, but it's such not a part of like the culture of video games anymore. But then things like, challenge runs and speed runs there's huge communities with millions of players and big like live events and stuff like that. What do you think about that? Like, why do you think people are not interested in high scores in the same way that people seem to be interested in these other types of, I guess, like extreme or competitive game challenges?
Yeah, it's a good question because they seem so similar, like pushing for a high score seems to have quite a bit of an overlap to speedrunning, for example.
Yeah.
So you would think that it would appeal to, I know there are certain players that kind of cross over or have big achievements in both areas, but there aren't that many. Mm-hmm. I think part of it might just be the obscurity and the lack of information.
Yeah.
And also in speedrunning, it's kind of like skateboarding where skateboarders look at section of a park or a building and then they use it for something that it wasn't really intended to be used for. Mm-hmm. It's like, well, what if we just tried this? And that opens up these kind of revelatory discoveries where, oh, we thought this is how speedrunning would work in this game. We just found out this information that completely blew the lid off of everything and changed the way people approach it. And I think in arcade games, there are a lot of interesting nuances to discover in scoring, but you're still sort of playing inside the box of the way the game was designed to be played. I think that's the biggest difference between speedrunning and scoring. You might find some glitches or some unintended mechanics or push the score higher than the developers thought, but it's never going to be like so far outside the box the way speedrunning is,
That's really interesting. Yeah, because you're right. With arcade games, the safeguards in place to kind of prevent the player from doing anything that's too far outside of what you would expect are more important because, like, you don't want somebody sitting on a machine for a couple of hours because they found some exploit in the game that makes it really easy to survive. These arcade games are designed around the fail state Whereas, something like Super Mario 64, like that's not a big deal. If there's a glitch that lets you skip over a huge section, like you're not taking money away from Nintendo if you're glitching in Super Mario 64 like you would be if you're finding exploits like that in an arcade game. And
and if you could, it would also just kind of neutralize the whole point of the game. Like, oh, we found a glitch where you can counter stop. Those games in arcades would just be banned from collecting scores, because then it just becomes meaningless, because everyone can repeat the glitch and counter stop or whatever it is, or a lot of times it would be infinite milking, where you can sit in one spot, hold down your auto fire button and put a toothpick in it, or walk away for a half an hour and come back. And typically games with those kind of exploits, they would just be banned because it's not interesting anymore to compete. I mean, Darius Gaiden was banned from scoring a year after it came out because they discovered the invincibility glitch.
Could you tell me a little bit more about that? Because I saw that referenced online a couple of times. But is that glitch present in the Switch version of the game too?
Yeah, you can still do it.
But do any of the high scoring runs on the scoreboards use that glitch?
If you trigger the glitch, it will not let you put your score on the arcade leaderboards.
Okay, that's smart. Yeah.
And a little notification even pops up, I think it's the same notification that pops up if you load up a save state, and it says something like the game state changed, so the score won't be uploaded,
That's great.
What a good port. So they thought about that.
Like a great detail, yeah.
Right, so you can't upload your score, but you can. I still use the glitch because there were times when I wanted to test things out or try to figure things out that would be impractical to do. Mm-hmm. And then you can use the invincibility to test some things or try to discover how boss patterns work without worrying about dying.
How does the glitch work? How do you trigger the invincibility glitch?
In Darius 1, certain bosses have those spheres. I'm sure they have an actual name, but when you destroy the spheres, they break into clusters and multiply. It's usually in Darius Gaiden, it's the bosses that are a throwback to the first Darius game that open with those little spheres appearing on the screen right before the boss comes out. Mm-hmm. And if you overlap the spheres in a certain way, they will overlap your sprite, and as they multiply, I don't understand why it does it. Just glitches out and you become invincible. At least to most things in the game, there's still some things that can kill you or bring you back to a normal state if you touch them. But it's not that easy to trigger. Mm-hmm. You have to line up to the sphere and time your movement into it pretty well. And I don't even understand, exactly what the right position is to trigger it. It's just something, if you kind of try it over and over and over, you'll get it. Prickly Angler argues that the glitch should be allowed, but I think it would be really boring because it takes away a lot of the tension, and because you would have to play through the game until you get to the second boss. And then if you don't trigger the glitch, you would have to reset and play the first level over again and the second level over again, and then try for the glitch. Like, it takes a lot of tries to get it. So you would just be, if that was a valid way to get high scores, you would have to reset so many times until you triggered the glitch that it would get really frustrated and boring to play the game.
Well, I think
I could see it maybe be in its own category.
Exactly. Yeah. I was going to say, like, comparing to the speedrun community, like where almost every game has that, where there's the glitchless and then the regular and then the any percent category where, mm-hmm. Yeah. In a perfect world, if we had like a high score website that was the equivalent of speedrun.com, then, you could go to any of these games. And, if you decided that, mm-hmm. okay, I want to see how far I can push this glitch, then you could compete with other people specifically doing that.
Right. Mm-hmm. And the crazy thing is the scores wouldn't probably be higher than the world records because they already optimized everything to the point where even with invincibility, it would probably be hard to find a way to improve,
Well, yeah, I mean, I guess in a game where so much of the score is dependent on no missing anyways, like the best players are already, not getting hit by stuff. So invincibility is not going to be a huge boon.
And they've found ways to play really aggressively and point blank things without dying and stuff. So in the end, the invincibility would only create a really minor score advantage, probably, at least comparing to the top players, you know.
Sure. Yeah.
It would make it really easy for average players to get scores much higher than they probably otherwise could. But at the highest level, it wouldn't really make a big difference.
So where are you with the game now? Do you still play Darius Gaiden, or are you playing a different game now?
I'm kind of on hiatus just because of how busy things are. Sure. I kind of IRL.
Yeah.
Just over like the past 6 months or a year, I haven't really been that active. The last thing I did was I did a community record for the crab route, the Hysteric Empress. So I did a lot of research and studying that boss. And then I was helping out Prickly Angler because he did a no miss, no bomb, no auto fire run.
Wow.
So recently we were comparing notes on, it was kind of cool because I was sharing some strategies about that boss. And then he took that and kind of figured out his own way and discovered kind of another approach to it. That was kind of cool, just seeing some of that collaboration going on.
That is really cool, and exactly the kind of stuff that we miss out on with the Japanese community not wanting to share with us all of their cool techniques and knowledge of these games.
Exactly, yeah. And just the fact that there's so few people kind of labbing out. I was thinking about that because I've watched the fighting game community, how it's gone from, you know, you didn't even know what some of the techniques were that Japanese players were doing. It was a lot more like shmups. And now a fighting game comes out and it's been out for 2 days, or a new DLC character comes out and players are tournament ready with this character in 48 hours and they've already lapped out every combo and there's tutorial videos all over YouTube. So it's cool and it makes everything more accessible for a lot of players to get into it, but it also kind of destroys a little bit of the mystery and the discovery process because there's so many people labbing that stuff out day one, you know, and sharing it all on YouTube. So I think with shmups, it is kind of cool, that obscurity, and you feel like you're discovering something, like I said, that archaeology, but at the same time, it can be so obscure to the point where you're literally the only person currently even like pursuing a high score in that game or that route or that ship or whatever. So yeah, it's kind of cool when the stars align and you have somebody else interested in the same game and you're actively communicating. And sometimes I think you just have to pick, if you want that, you just have to pick a game that, I think that's one of the reasons Battle Garaga is popular, is because there is a lot of information out about the game that people have shared and there are active players. So you're not playing in a void if you choose to get into that game, you know, even if you don't live in Japan.
Yeah, or Dodonpachi or something like that, where there's so many runs, there's so much knowledge that's been aggregated by people about them. Right,
and you're not going to get the Western community record in 2 weeks because no one else has posted a score yet or whatever. Like there's going to be kind of a high bar, the other players set or whatever. But Darius Gaiden is kind of interesting in that respect, in that it's pretty unoptimized by Western players considering how popular it is.
Yeah, well, I was surprised to hear you say that, estimated that you'd only played it for a few months or practiced it for a few months before getting the Western high score. So that's maybe hopefully encouraging for somebody out there who might be listening to this. If you know, if you want to get a score in Darius Gaiden, like, you know, it's possible. Like it's not one of these games where the bar is insanely high, at least for, you know, again, outside of Japan.
Right. It's not DOJ white label where a new player would probably have to play that game nonstop for 4 years or something, you know, every day to get a competitive score with the high level Japanese players. Like you don't have to be a god to access. And that, I think that's kind of true of some other games from the 90s, where the games are complex enough to be interesting for score, but they're not so complex and difficult that you basically have to like quit your day job to get a high score, you know?
Yeah. I don't really play games for score at this point. I mostly am just, you know, one credit clearing my way through easier stuff. But I found that to be true just as far as the games that I've gravitated towards more and enjoyed more. Like I do like cave games. I think they're just that the fact that you're, you know, being engaged to the maximum like every single second does make them really fun. But I was playing Prehistoric Isle 2 the other week. A pretty standard horizontal, and it was just like, it clicked with me more because I felt like I could totally understand everything. I wasn't being overwhelmed with stuff, and it seemed more approachable to get to that like higher tier of skill level with the game, if that makes sense.
Yeah, and I think that's one of the reasons Darius Gaiden is so popular, is because it's cool, but it's pretty clear what's going on. It's accessible. But then I think maybe it hasn't appealed to some of the more hardcore players because they clear it in a day and maybe don't see the point in optimizing it to a crazy level, and they move on to something else without really delving into it super deep.
Yeah. Are there any other games that you've played, or maybe that you'd like to play more at some point in the future that are like that are kind of in that in between road of mechanically interesting, but maybe some of the like super players have overlooked them?
I don't know if it's overlooked, but I think the Raiden Fighters series kind of fits with a little bit with Darius Gaiden, because you can pick the slave ship or the ferry ship in those games, which some people would say is cheating, but
all of the high scores.
It's not really cheating. It's not really cheating, because if you're playing for high score, you're playing with other players who pick that same ship.
Right.
And it's pretty easy to clear the game. It's pretty easy to start getting into scoring, and it has really interesting scoring, like Raiden Fighters 2. I think it's one of the best games out there, but I think part of the reason it didn't get the notoriety of a Battle Garaga or a Dodonpachi is there was never a port of it. And also the encryption on the board was really strong. So when those games were sort of building their reputation, didn't really solidify the way that it would have if, say, there was a PlayStation port, and everyone who had Strikers 2 and Dodonpachi and Battle Garaga on the Saturn and Rayforce on the Saturn also had some imaginary Saturn version of that series or PlayStation version of that series.
Yeah.
It probably would have more of the status of one of the greatest games like Dodonpachi or Garaga, but it was relatively late when people could play it on even MAME. So
I just 1cc'd Raiden Fighters 2 last month, and I think maybe another thing that contributes to that is even if you are playing it on MAME, like if you want to play with the slave ship or the ferry ship, which pretty much everybody is going to want to do, then you have to go through like so much stuff, because there's that time locked mechanic for unlocking.
A time release, yeah, right.
Just getting to the point on the ROM where you're able to actually play as the ship that you want to play through, like it's a whole headache to do that. So I feel like it's just an extra barrier. So, there's no port, so you got to emulate it. And then in emulating it, you got to do a bunch of extra setup. So how many people are going to go through the effort just to see if they like a game?
To go through that. Yeah. I got into it via the actual PCB a long time ago. And when I bought it, it just already had everything unlocked because it had been in an arcade, So it takes some insane amount of time for everything to unlock. But in an arcade where you're turning it on every day, all that stuff would get unlocked.
There's a BIOS menu on it where you can manually, there's like a code that you can put in to manually advance the days of operation to unlock stuff.
Oh, right. Yeah.
But it's a finding that information online to figure out how to do it.
Yeah. It feels like a game that more people should play.
Yeah, I agree.
It's not like it's this obscure game that nobody plays, but it's like it never kind of got its full due, to the point where it's even kind of hard to find the secrets online. There was always this one website that had all of the locations of the ferries and all the bonuses and stuff, but there's surprisingly not as much information about the Raiden Fighters series as you would think.
Yeah, especially for one of the few shmup series that is still somewhat active. Like there's still new Raiden games coming out. It's surprising to me that they haven't, like, even just the first couple of Raiden games, there is, I guess there's a port, but it's a terrible port for it. Have you played that one for I think it's called Raiden Legacy.
Uh-huh.
It's an awful port. It's got slowdown. It's missing a bunch of features. Yeah, it's weird when like they obviously put quite a bit of work and I assume money into Raiden 5, and I think there was one after that too a few years back that they haven't put out even a basic PC or console port for Raiden Fighters.
There is one coming out, I'm pretty sure of I kind of lost track of it.
Do you know who's
but
doing
there is
it?
I want to say Success or somebody like that, but I can't remember.
Okay.
But yeah, the Xbox 360 version is really, really good. It's like an M2 quality type of thing. And I think one of the original developers was one of the main programmers for the Xbox 360 version. So that one's definitely good. But there's also a weird thing with that game where the arcade board ran at something like 54 or 55 hertz. So it's hard to play it on a 60 hertz flat screen monitor and have it look smooth.
Interesting.
So the 360 port has different options. Like you can just run it at 60 hertz, which is too fast, and it looks smooth. Or you can run it at the right speed, but it has to do some type of frame skipping thing so that it looks jittery to play it at the correct speed. And because the bullets are really fast moving and some of the backgrounds are really fast moving, you really notice the kind of like having had the PCB where you play it at the correct speed on a CRT monitor and it's the right speed and it runs really smooth. It's just not the same experience on the 360. Even though they did a really, really good job with the port, it's just limited by the technology because the Xbox 360 just can't output 54 hertz or whatever it is. It's just not possible. Or if it does, it has like really horrible. I think there is an option to output the true frame rate, but it has horrible tearing because it's still coming out at 60 hertz from the 360 or whatever. So now that there are variable refresh rate monitors, it would be possible to do a PS5 port of Raiden Fighters or something and have it use variable refresh rate and actually match the speed of the arcade board without having it look all jittery, which would be really cool. But that's another kind of barrier. Like on M2 ports, no arcade game really runs at a perfect flat 60 frames per second. But usually it's close enough that they can tweak the game speed to match the arcade board, and you don't really notice it being jittery. But when it's some of these boards like the Cebu SPI that Raiden Fighters runs on, or some of the old IRAM boards, they ran at like way below 60 hertz. So it's just this kind of problem where you can't really match the same experience on a console like the 360 because like 54 hertz is a lot slower than 60. It's very noticeable if the game's running at the wrong speed. It's almost like it's halfway down to PAL refresh rate, And if you see a game running at PAL refresh rate, it's like massively obvious that it's slower.
Yeah, well, yeah, there's more than a 10% drop. Yeah, it's gonna make a big impact on gameplay.
Right. So if you just run Raiden Fighters at 60, it's like a different game. Whereas if you run most shooters at like that was an issue with the Xbox 360 port of Katsui, but it's not that noticeable because the game runs at like 59 hertz or something, So most players would just, unless you played the arcade board every day, you wouldn't really notice the difference in speed. You would just adapt to it. But if the arcade board runs at 54 hertz and you're playing it at 60, you're like, wait, what the this isn't even the same game.
Yeah. I don't want to keep you for too much longer here. Before I let you go, can you tell me a little bit, what is it that motivates you to play shoot 'em up, especially to play for score, to do these extra step challenges in these games?
Oh, right. Where it's sort of a grind, but you're doing it over time. Yeah. It's like that urge to just improve consistently at something and get better at it. And it scratches an itch that playing games more casually doesn't do. I've enjoyed plenty of games, where I've played more laid back stuff, but fighting games can be the same way where once you kind of get into it, it feels a little boring to go back and play stuff that's not as challenging or stuff that doesn't require you to sort of be actively learning and analyzing what you're doing and why you're doing it. And so for some people, that's probably the aspect of it that's off-putting because they don't want to feel like they're doing work when they're sitting on the couch playing a game. Mm-hmm. I think if you don't approach this genre a little bit like it's a job or it's homework, you don't progress very fast because you're just playing and then like hitting a wall and hoping for the best and then gradually improving, but you're not analyzing it enough to make rapid progress because you're not thinking about, why did I die? What happened there? What would a better strategy be? Let me go look at what another player did, how they solved that. Or it's like a lot of pursuits where the more that you put in and the more thoughtful you are about how you approach it, the better results you get, So it's probably similar to music or going to the gym or a lot of pursuits where if you stick with it over time, there's a deeper satisfaction that comes from the improvement and seeing the results. Maybe part of the reason it's so obscure to pursue scores is because a lot of people would say there's not really an extrinsic reward to it, where if you go to the gym, it's like, well, now I have a 6-pack. Everyone can see that or whatever, or if I learn how to play guitar, I can take my guitar to a party or anywhere else I go and people will appreciate that I can play and I can entertain people. Whereas like a score on a personal level, it's meaningful or maybe to a few friends or people that played that game with you, but it is something that's a little difficult to share with other people. Yeah. Like it's a little hard to say like, oh, I got 12 million points in Darius Gaiden and have a random stranger just go like, oh, cool. How did you do that? Or, like they don't have any idea what that means or what you're talking about. Yeah. So it is a very personal pursuit, one that you're not really expecting accolades or. So I guess it's just kind of about the personal satisfaction of pursuing it and learning more about it and progressing as you go.
Yeah. No, I love that. Well, did you have anything that you wanted to plug or is there anybody that you want to shout out before we go?
Yeah, I don't have anything to plug, but I guess I'd just say thanks to Prickly Angler, Matthew, players that helped me figure out things with the game. And I'm hoping that I'll get more active and kind of get back to doing some scores and playing some other games too when life kind of gets a little bit less busy here. Hopefully over the next months or year or two, I'll have some more time to jump back into it.
Yeah, we'll look forward to that for sure. Thank you so much, Rastan, for taking the time to chat with me for a little bit. I really appreciate it.
Yeah, no problem. Thanks for reaching out.
If you're itching to talk about the shmup you're playing, your PCB collection, or your custom arcade stick build, please reach out to me either in the YouTube comments or via Discord. You'll find me in the Shmup channel, or you can direct message at Looking for Pants. If you're looking for more shmup content and you're not there already, you can check out my YouTube series I Wanna Shmup and follow my adventures in tackling the STG wiki list one rank at a time. Also, if you are listening to this on YouTube, you might not know that One Credit Chats is available through most podcatcher apps, so you can stream it on Spotify, Audible, or whichever service you prefer. Thanks for joining me this episode, and thanks again to Rastan for taking the time to chat.